The following video will discuss the basics of analysis. It will define analysis and cover some basic analytical strategies.
Analysis is a process of understanding where you break something down into smaller parts. Now there's two different things that we need to take away from that. The first is that analysis is a process of understanding, that we're trying to either understand something's function, how something operates or works, or we're trying to understand something's significance or relevance, why it's important, why it's relevant, how effective it is, those kind of evaluation arguments. The second point is that we're breaking down something into smaller parts. Now, this presupposes that when you do analysis, what we're looking at is complexity. Complex things, right, are issues or ideas or concepts or texts with many interrelated parts. Okay, so when we're looking at complex things, that's when we analyze. And in particular, we analyze when we problem solve. Okay, so first of all, as I've already mentioned, analysis involves looking at something's function, its operation. And this is probably one of the most prevalent kinds of analysis that you'll find in academia. So for instance, let's say you're in a chemistry class and you're trying to understand a chemical reaction. Well, we would do analysis to figure out that chemical reaction. We would look at the molecules and how all the molecules interact or work together. Now, significance or relevance, when we analyze for those things, those usually happen in the social sciences. History, psychology, English class, rhetoric class. Right. When we're looking for significance or relevance, we're asking questions like, why is this important? Why is this effective? Stuff like that. Okay, now I want to start off our discussion of analysis with a little story. So, first of all, about a couple weeks ago, me and my wife babysat 3 little girls from across the street. Now, their ages ranged from 7 years old, 4, and 1.5 was the youngest. And we were all drawing, and somehow, I don't really remember how, but the topic of magic came up. And I said, hey, guess what? I know how to do a magic trick. Do you guys want to see it? And they all wanted to see it, of course. And so I said, I can pull off my thumb. And I proceeded to do this trick, and I'm sure you guys have seen it before, where, and I made a lot of noises. Oh my gosh, it hurts. And their reactions were all a little bit different, and I thought it actually kind of explains analysis and the kind of mindset that we need to have for analysis. So the first girl, the 1.5-year-old girl, the youngest, she didn't even care. She was just oblivious. She didn't even know what was going on. She kind of looked at me when I made the noise and then went back to her drawing. Yeah, she didn't know what was going on. The second girl, the 4-year-old girl, she thought I was some kind of magician or sorcerer or something. She looked at me and like, whoa, I can't believe you can do that. And it ended there. She knew that I was doing a trick, but she thought it was just magical. And then the third girl was rather introspective about it. The 7-year-old girl. She said, wait a minute, do that again. And she wanted me to do it again, and she walked over by me and looked at me doing this from the side and kind of started to figure out how I was doing this trick. So anyway, why do I tell you this? Well, I tell you this because this demonstrates, I think, 2 really key things about analysis. The first is that analysis is something that we do all the time. Anytime we have a complex problem that we need to figure out, we are engaged in analysis. Okay, complex problem involves many different parts, and we have to figure out how they all work. So let's say, for instance, you want to bake a cake. There are many different parts to baking a cake, right? We would break that complex topic down into its different elements, and those elements happen to be the ingredients, right? First, we measure out the flour, then we measure out the wet goods, like the eggs and the milk or whatever, right? Or let's say another example would be buying a used car. You want to buy a used car, you look at all the different variables You examine each one of those variables. You look at the price of the car. You look at its condition. You look under the hood, looking at the engine. You factor in how many miles are on the car, on whether or not, the brand of the car, etc. Right? We look at all the different elements and we try to see how they all relate to come up with our conclusion. So the first example with the cake, we're trying to understand how all those different parts function. How is putting together all those different ingredients, how will that create the cake? The second one with the used car, right, that would be one of significance or relevance. How good of a car is this? Right? By looking at all the elements, we come to a conclusion. The second reason I give you the little example of the little girls is because it helps us understand something about analysis. The first girl, obviously, you guys know, she was not engaged in analysis, right? She didn't even know what was going on. And this is kind of indicative of not too many students, but there might be a couple where we're reading a text and you ask yourself, I don't even understand that this person is being emotional or logically profound. Like, I don't even notice those things. So that does happen, right? And that's not analysis. If you don't notice that certain key moves are being made in a text, then obviously you can't analyze. The second girl also is not engaged in analysis because she's not being introspective or critically examining. She notices the phenomenon, so she's one step beyond the youngest girl. She's like, whoa, that's really cool. But she's not engaged in analysis because she doesn't take it further and to try to understand how this thing is functioning, how it's operating, or if we went beyond significance or relevance, if she wanted to go into more depth. Right? So instead, what she thought I was some kind of magician or sorcerer, right? Like I said. And this oftentimes is probably one of the most prevalent problems with analysis for students, is that they'll look at a text or a movie or whatever and they'll say, wow, that's really emotional. And they attest that reaction to simply, well, the person delivering the message is just an expert. They're just really good at this. And they end it there. There's no attempt to try to understand how all the parts are operating together. Okay, it's just, well, this is simply emotional, or this is moving, whatever. Okay, so we want to be like the third girl who doesn't just accept the fact that something is, well, that's really cool, well, you're a magician here. But with analysis, we want to start asking questions, be introspective, and then start to look at the details a little bit more closely. Let me look at that again. Let me see that from a different angle. I noticed that you're using both hands here. Why are you doing that? Right, start asking questions and looking at things closely is analysis. So that brings us then to the things that I want to talk about today, which are 5 different strategies that you can use in order to be an effective analyzer. And before we begin, I'd like you to download the worksheet called Analysis Basics. And once you're finished, go ahead and click the continue button and we'll start. So I trust at this point that you guys have downloaded the handout for analysis, the 5 different strategies. Alright, so the 5 different strategies that we're talking about really are predicated on these 3 interrogative questions, journalist questions. The first is, what? Right? And this is important because you can't analyze unless you first notice something going on. Right? Let's say you want to buy a used car, the example I used before. Well, you wouldn't be able to infer that, hey, maybe there's been some accident or problem with this car. Let's say if you didn't notice that, wow, the bumper is a different color, is a little bit of a different color than the rest of the car. Right? Noticing that key element would lead you to then start to analyze, okay, well, why is it a different color? What happened? How did that occur? Why did that occur? Stuff like that, okay? So this is a very crucial point, but I will say if you simply notice phenomenon, you're not analyzing. Just like the second girl in our example. She noticed that I was doing a trick, but she didn't analyze. She just simply noticed that, hey, wow, you're doing something cool. But she didn't seek to try to understand why that thing occurred or how that thing occurred and whether or not it was relevant or important or significant, right? So that was an analysis. So the first two heuristics, tools, that you can use for analysis are based on what questions? So you'll notice the first one on there is called notice and focus. And this basically asks you to trust your intuition. What things do you notice? What things are strange? What things are interesting? What things are revealing? So notice those things, but don't simply stay there. Go further with it. Go beneath the surface. If you stay surface level, you're not analyzing. Analysis, again, is about understanding. So then we start asking questions. So you'll notice after the notice and focus part of the handout, it says not just what is strange, what is revealing, but why. Right? And that gets us to analysis. Number two is somewhat similar to that, is to notice patterns or contrasts, okay, repetition, things like that. Again, we don't want to just stay there. We want to ask questions on, well, why are these things repeating, or why are these things contrasting? We want to ask questions about those things that we're noticing. And this is particularly important because, just like with the example of the little girl, she started to notice that I was doing a pattern. Every time I pulled my thumb off, I had to put both my hands together. Right? That was a pattern that helped her understand the function of my little trick. Okay, so patterns or contrasts, repetition, those things can help you also analyze, but don't just simply notice it, go beyond. Number three is a question primarily for going beyond. So once you've found some kind of, once you've made some kind of observation, then start asking so what kind of questions. And those are really how and why types of questions. So I notice something and then I ask, well, why is this thing here? Or how is this thing here? Like, why does this element matter? Why does it matter that this author is stating this word 3 times in a row? Like, what effect does that have? Okay, we don't want to just observe that the author said something 3 times, but we want to start to try to explain it too. Number 4 is another primary function of analysis. Our job is to help our readers understand the text fully, to understand its function and understand its significance and relevance. So that's why we need to make the implicit explicit. In other words, make the things that are not stated, stated. All right, so an example of that would be, if any of you guys have seen the Dos Equis commercial, it's called The Most Interesting Man in the World, and he always does all these like heroic feats, and right, the explicit things are the things that he does, right? All those cool things that he does, like, I don't know, like his mom has a tattoo of him or whatever. But the implicit argument there is that if you want to be cool, or you need to drink Dos Equis, right? That Dos Equis, if you're drinking that beer, will make you have bravado, make you cool, make you interesting, make you sexually attractive, whatever, right? Those are things underneath the surface. They never say that the beer does that or will give you that, okay? But it's implied. So when we're doing analysis, we want to make those implications. We want to make them evident for our readers. And the last thing that I'll say is number 5 on our list is called 10 on 1. And basically what this is a good, really, rule of thumb to think about when you're analyzing. Say more about less. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to say 10 things about everything you notice, but try to say as much as possible about things that you notice. So, for instance, if I notice that this person seems particularly persuasive or moving, I don't want to just simply state that, oh, they're persuasive because this is an issue that's important to them and leave it there. I want to go further with it. Say as much as possible about each thing. And that's really what good analysis is it says more about less. Okay? So anyway, that ends our discussion of analysis. If you feel confident with what we've discussed today, the concepts and strategies that we've talked about today, then go ahead and please take the quiz, and good luck.